The Only Road, Chapter 3. No! Mama shouted so loudly the baby started crying. She ran to Jaime and Angela and hugged them tight. It's too dangerous. Think of something else. We've thought of everything. Papa hid his face in his hands. It's the only way. Jaime could barely breathe, and not just because Mama was squeezing him so hard. The daydream of living in the rainforest suddenly seemed like a vacation. She was right. Going to Tomas was too dangerous. Everyone knew the stories. Gangs robbed you at every turn. Immigration officers beat you up before sending you back home. That had happened to a few people in the village. The papa of one of Jaime's classmates had lost an arm boarding a moving train. Jaime could think of two other people from the village who had tried to make the journey and were never heard from again. They were assumed dead. Rosita's best friend, the beautiful Marcela, who Jaime and Miguel used to argue over who would get to marry, had been abducted near the border of Los Estados Unidos. Whispers among the grown-ups claimed she had been sold as a slave. She was still missing. And all of this was just going through Mexico. Then there was crossing the border at Los Estados Unidos. But hardest of all was the idea of leaving home to live with Tomas. Tomas, his older brother. Memories of him ranged from hazy to facts based on others' stories. The one time his family went to the beach and Tomas pointed out the colors of the stormy sunset reflected on the water, Jaime knew was a real memory. Every time he witnessed a spectacular sunset with the reds burning into the cool greens and blues, he thought of Tomas and wondered if Tomas could see it too. That sunset would forever stay in Jaime's mind, but Tomas's face had blurred to the poor quality image the village computers showed during their rare video Skype calls. "How's my little brother?" Tomas always asked when they talked. Jaime never knew what to say and would reply with a simple "bien." Then he'd ask Tomas questions. Did you see the new James Bond movie? Had he met Jennifer Lopez yet? Was it true that the public schools there had art classes? Jaime had been 4 when his 17-year-old brother had left to work on a cattle ranch in El Norte, in a place no one in Guatemala had ever heard of called Nuevo Mexico. Tomas was lucky, everyone said. Because of Tomas's love for Hollywood movies, he'd learned English perfectly, which had allowed him to move there legally through a sponsorship the rancher offered. Few had that luck. Not that Jaime would call it luck. From what Tomas said, he worked more than 60 hours a week in the scorching sun and the bitter cold. There wasn't much time for enjoying sunsets or going to movies, and now his papa talked about Jaime and Angela traveling over 4,000 kilometers to join Tomas. Jaime didn't blame his mama for becoming hysterical. He didn't want to go either. Will it just be us two? Can't we all go? Jaime wished with all his might that someone would give him a different answer than the one he feared. Glances from the adults shifted from Mama, with her limp, to Abuela, who struggled to roll out tortillas, then to Rosito and little Kiko. None of them could take the trip, and none of the others would leave them behind. Tio Daniel shook his head and muttered, "We could never afford that, as it is 2 passages?" "It's better this way," Papa articulated his words slowly, as if he were trying to convince himself. "And once you're there, you'll be with Tomas, your familia." "No, no, no," Mama kept repeating. "You two can't go, can't." Angela escaped Mama's grasp only to have Tia hug her in the same tight embrace. Tia looked up to the heavens and wailed, "2 children in 1 week, why are you punishing me?" No one in the kitchen said anything. They just allowed Mama and Tia to continue crying on their children's shoulders, both of whom were the same height as their diminutive mothers. No one told them to stop. No one told them it was going to be okay. It was a while before Mama finally released Jaime. His back was sweaty from where her arms had held him. He wished there were something he could say, something to make her feel better, but this new turn of events had left him numb. If he and Angela stayed, they could end up dead. If they left, they might end up dead. Either way, life was never again going to be the same. Their mamas stared at their children a second longer before each tucking a loose strand of wavy black hair behind their right ears and sighing. Without realizing it, Abuela used the back of her wrist to do the same with her silver hair. We need to start making plans. I'll contact Tomas. There isn't much time. Papa pressed his hands against his worn pants and stood. He and Tio began conferring in low voices as they headed to the door. Padre Lorenzo saw this opportunity to leave as well. I have brothers in Mexico who offer shelter and sanctuary for refugees. I shall contact them. Abuela said nothing, just grabbed a glass bottle with her arthritic hands and rolled out the tortillas until they were too thin to cook. Rosita shifted the sleeping Kiko from her lap and excused herself from the kitchen. Do we really have to go? Jaime whispered to Angela. Angela licked her lips and removed the Elfa's crumpled note from her pocket. She crushed it further in her hands until it couldn't compress any more, then flung it at Jaime's memorial drawing of Miguel, which was taped to the wall. Would you like to be in the gang responsible for his death? No. He didn't have to think about it. Angela nodded as if she'd read his mind. Then we don't have a choice. Only those who had been in the kitchen that day knew of the escape plan. Jaime and Angela had to pretend nothing was going on and continue as if they were spending the rest of their lives in their Guatemalan village. Jaime volunteered to help paint the backdrop for the Easter pageant, and Angela told Pulguita she would deliver the mysterious packet in a few days. If people thought they were acting weird, hopefully it was excused as mourning Miguel and not because there was something to hide. The hardest part for Jaime was saying goodbye to his friends and extended family without them knowing. He gave his two best friends at school the Batman comic books that Tomas had sent him for Christmas, saying he was tired of not understanding the English words. For his little cousins, he divided his few art supplies. A gut-wrenching feeling told him there were many people he'd never see again. Hopefully the Elfas were among them. A few days after the funeral, Tia Rosario held up jeans that looked a lot like Jaime's favorite pair. Correction, they were his favorite pair. The ink stain on the front left pocket proved it. You're the one with an eye for detail, she said. Look at these carefully and see if you noticed anything strange about them. Confused, Jaime took his jeans from his aunt. He searched them up and down. No holes, no new stains. What's wrong with them? Nothing, but look at them again. Pay special attention to the waistband, she said while grabbing a pair that were probably Angela's, judging by the stitching on the back pockets. Jaime squinted at the waistband and ran the material between his fingers. He compared the material with the rest of the pants. He even sniffed it. Nothing. He shook his head. They seem perfectly normal. Tia let out a sigh of relief. Good. Now whatever you do, don't lose them and don't tell anyone about them. We've exchanged 15,000 quetzales into a little less than 2,000 US dollars and sewed them into the waistband and cuffs. Don't use any of it unless absolutely necessary until you get to the border of El Norte. Even then, it might not be enough to pay for the crossing. If someone tries to rob you, hopefully no one will know the money's there. Jaime collapsed into his chair, gripping his sketchbook tight to his chest. 15,000 quetzales for the two of us? The words came out in a whisper. Tia shook her head no. She squinted at the seams one more time. Glasses were a rich person's accessory. For each of you. The world seemed to tilt as he blinked and took several deep breaths. 30,000 quetzales. Jaime couldn't imagine that much money. No wonder they were taking days to prepare just to gather all that money. His insides twisted with guilt. He was going to be sick. The whole family was making sacrifices for him, doing this because of him. It wasn't worth it. He wasn't worth it. You can't do this. The words spilled out of him like marbles from a ripped sack. It's too much. We'll stay. You won't, Tia interrupted with such determination it sounded like Abuela speaking. All our work won't be for nothing. You're going so you can be safe. End of discussion. But 30,000 quetzales? Of course he and Angela were the only ones leaving. The family couldn't afford to send anyone else. He doubted his parents together made that in a year. Just because he hadn't been at the park with Miguel. All our work won't be for nothing, he repeated Tia's words. But if they really had to take this trip, a lot could happen. 4,000 kilometers was a long way. If only he and Angela had passports and papers that said they would that they could enter Los Estados Unidos legally, like Tomas. Are you sure it's well hidden? Now that he knew what the pants contained, he kept imagining incriminating lumps in the seams or loud crinkles in the fabric. Tia gave him an odd smile that combined worry with pride. We can only thank the Lord he gave me a job sewing jeans in the factory. I know how the seams should look. Jaime took one last glance at the jeans, pretending he didn't know what they held. The neat rows of stitches on the waistband did look exactly like they were supposed to. Moonlight was streaming through the empty window when his papa shook him awake. It's time. Jaime blinked a few times and rolled out of the hammock strung in the room he shared with his parents. He didn't have to ask what was going on. One day remained before Angela and had to make her delivery. One day before he was expected to join them. He pulled on a dark green shirt and his favorite jeans, thinking he could feel the weight of the money sewed into the seams. In the backpack Mama had packed for him days ago, he put his sketchbook, pencil case, and the only family picture he had with Tomas on the windowsill. A lizard watched his every move. Neither parent had gone to sleep, though Mama's makeup looked fresh and Papa had shaved. They each put an arm around him as they walked to his aunt and uncle's house. The streets were quiet and still. With an occasional shift, the wind brought sounds of cars in the distance and people at the local tavern. The alphas, if they were awake, were off terrorizing a different neighborhood. Above the walkers made their pilgrimage. The sky was clear, shining every star down on them. If only it were a normal night and Jaime could curl up in the outside hammock and capture the starry night in his sketchbook. They walked through the patio into the kitchen where anyone who was family or considered family always hung out. But this morning it only held Abuela. A mini banquet of desayuno chapan had been laid out, like those American turkey feasts they showed in movies. Thanksgiving or something, Thanksgiving. Eggs from the chickens out back, Abuela's corn tortillas, black beans, fried plantains, sliced avocados and mangoes, pork salchichas, and a steaming mug of hot chocolate that had been Miguel's favorite. Such a meal they could only afford on Christmas. Any other time, Jaime would have dived right in. Any other time, the old television wouldn't be missing from its usual spot. Siéntate, Abuela commanded him to sit in her regional dialect. Her silver hair seemed pulled into a bun more tightly than usual. She wore a black dress like she had when Jaime's grandfather had died. There's not much time and you need your strength. She loaded a huge plate with food and set it in front of him. A few seconds later, Angela walked in with her parents and sat down wearing jeans and a baggy blue t-shirt, her black hair pulled back in a ponytail. Jaime wasn't used to seeing his cousin dressed so plain, but maybe that was the point. Remembering what happened to the gorgeous Marcella, Jaime didn't want men thinking Angela was pretty. They ate in silence, not because they were hungry. A couple times Jaime was sure he was going to be sick from anxiety or nerves, but one stern look from Abuela and he kept eating what he'd been served. Abuela didn't allow picky eaters. Everything placed in front of you had to be eaten, whether you liked it or not. He was mopping up the remaining bean sauce with a bit of tortilla when he heard the rattle of an old pickup truck. The Alphas. They'd heard about the plan. They were going to get him and his cousin. Through the window, Jaime watched the truck with tall wooden planks attached to the sides sputter to a stop outside Tio's house. A fair-skinned old man with white hair eased himself out of the vehicle. His wrinkled hands braced over the door in the moonlight. Not the Alphas, just Pancho. Some days he sold fruit and meats. Other days, Pancho's truck held furniture. Today, it was filled with sacks of used clothes. Are you ready? It's over 3 hours to the Mexican border, and it's better to cross it while it's still dark, Pancho rasped. The remaining bean-drenched tortilla dropped from Jaime's hand onto the plate. Abuela didn't demand he finish it. Part of him wished she would, just so things would feel familiar. Instead, she handed him, Angela, and Pancho plastic bags of food before walking off into the night. She didn't even say goodbye. It would have been too hard for her. Tears rolled down his face as he hugged both of his parents. Vamos, patajos, Pancho called the youths to go. Jaime and Angela hugged each other's parents before climbing into the back of the truck. The burlap sacks were scratchy but cushioned, making it easy and somewhat comfortable to be wedged between the goods. They poked their heads through the burlap as the motor turned. Mama hobbled, holding onto Jaime's hand as the old truck clunked down the road. I love you both. Be safe, she called out louder than she should have. Her hand slipped from Jaime's and she was panting in the middle of the dirt road. Jaime watched her until the truck turned a corner and she, his mama, was gone. Who knew when he'd see her again? If he would. No, he wouldn't think like that. Of course he'd see her again. Of course. They passed the cemetery where they had buried Miguel, the road leading to the school Miguel would have attended in the fall, the park where Miguel... Good, he never wanted to see that place ever again. The village Jaime had known his whole life, gone. His house, his family, gone. From now on, home would only get farther and farther away.